In this lecture, we are going to start our study of the reproductive system. When we look at the male and female reproductive systems, they're organized as primary sex organs, which are known as the gonads. These are the organs that make the gametes, the sperm and the eggs, and the hormones. The primary sex organs are the ovaries and testes. And then we also have the accessory reproductive organs. Now, the gametes are formed from the process of meiosis, and meiosis takes a parent cell and it takes it through several cycles of cell division to end up forming 4 daughter cells, each with 23 chromosomes. You might remember that we called this the haploid number of chromosomes when you studied this previously. Once you have the sperm and the egg fuse to form the fertilization process, you form what's called a zygote. The zygote will have 46 chromosomes, which is also known as diploid. So for humans, our diploid number is 46, or 23 pairs of chromosomes, and haploid means half of that. The accessory organs basically form the reproductive tract. They might help move the sperm or move the eggs. They might produce secretions such as semen, and they also form the external genitalia. So basically, the male's purpose is to make the sperm and deliver it to the female, and you can see that males make quite a bit of sperm every day. It takes roughly 34 days to actually make a sperm, but 500 million are actually matured per day, whereas the female's job is to produce the eggs, the oocytes, and incubate the embryo and fetus, and the female is going to have 1 functional gamete per month, typically. And as I mentioned, the zygote is the fertilized egg, and both of these organs, these testes and ovaries, are going to be releasing hormones. When we look at the male reproductive system, the primary sex organs are going to be the gonads, which are called the testes. Now, testes with an E is plural, testicle or testis with an I is the singular form. And notice that the testis or testes are outside of the body, and they sit inside this sac of skin called the scrotum. Now, the sperm will be made in the testes, and then they need to get out. So you'll see the structures, the accessory organs. We'll see this thing called the epididymis. They're going to come up through the vas deferens or ductus deferens, which is a long tube. They're going to come around behind the bladder and then go into the urethra. You probably remember from the urinary system that there's a prostatic urethra, a membranous urethra, and a spongy urethra. And the sponge urethra is primarily within the penis. And so these are the accessory organs. So let's look at the testes. As I mentioned, they're outside of the body in the scrotum, and the function is to make sperm and also to make testosterone. They get their blood supply from the testicular artery, which comes off the abdominal aorta, and they are connected to the body through these structures called spermatic cords. So the testes, as I said, are outside of the body, and this muscular tube is called the spermatic cord, and that's going to extend from the pelvic cavity of the male out to the scrotum. So these cords are muscle and fascia, and this is how all the blood vessels and the vas deferens and the vessels move between the testes and the rest of the body. And they pass right through the groin, which is the inguinal canal. And as it passes through there, there's actually abdominal muscle. And what can happen if you get a weak spot in an abdominal muscle, part of the small intestine can herniate or poke through, and this is called an inguinal hernia. There's different types of hernias that can occur, but this is specifically when the intestines can protrude, and you can see that when those cords come up through here, you can have a little more weakening here. You can see some common signs and symptoms. A lot of times this happens from maybe excessive lifting and straining, and you could just have weaker abdominal wall muscles. When we look at the testes, they actually start inside the body. You can see 4 months, 7 months, and at birth. And so it's important that they descend and they go to the outside of the body. But again, that happens after birth. If you ever did a dissection of a fetal pig, the testes are inside the pig. And so they're going to descend. And if they don't descend, you can have what's called cryptorchidism, which is basically sterility. So if the testes fail to descend and go to the outside of the body, it can cause sterility. And we'll deal with the whys of this in 1 second. If we look inside the scrotum, you have your scrotum, and then there's 2 chambers. Each testis has its own cavity, which is important. It helps the infections, basically prevents them from spreading from one side to one testicle to the other testicle. And if we look at some muscles that are here, there's one called the dartus muscle and the cremaster muscle. So I just realized my slide was a little messed up. I want to go back to that hernia slide so you can see all the symptoms of a hernia, just an FYI. And then they often do a surgical repair where they can poke the intestine back in and then put a mesh in there for reinforcement. We have the dartus muscle and we have the cremaster muscle. So the dartus muscle is the muscle that basically lines the inside of the scrotum and causes that wrinkling that you might see on the scrotal surface. The cremaster muscles, on the other hand, their job is to control where the testes are. So they can contract and pull the scrotum up with the testicle, or they can relax and allow it to hang lower. This is all based on temperature. We know that it's cooler when the testes are further away from the body. They say it's about 2 degrees cooler outside the body than inside. This is why the testes are outside of the pelvic cavity, and the sperm needed to be a little bit cooler. So this is to maintain temperature. If the temperature is very, very warm, then the muscle relaxes and it allows the testes to hang further away from the body to maintain the temperature. And when it's colder, the muscle contracts and it pulls the testes up closer to the body to keep them warm. This is why cryptorchidism, which we mentioned, if the testes don't descend, they're internal and it's too warm for sperm. They can't survive at that temperature. If we were to look inside the testis, we notice it's divided into lobules, and each of these lobules has these seminiferous tubules, and the seminiferous tubules function to produce the sperm. When we look at the testes, there's 2 main types of cells that are inside the seminiferous tubule. So it's a coiled tubule. You can see the lumen here with the sperm, and there's some cells around the outside. So this is where the meiosis happens. This is where the sperm are formed. And we have the spermatogenic cells, which are the cells that will become sperm. And then between them, we have what are called sustentacular cells, or nurse cells, which basically protect the spermatogenic cells. Now, if you were to look at a slide, or histology slide, you would see the coiled seminiferous tubules, and then between them are the interstitial cells, and the interstitial cells are where testosterone is produced. So the sperm are made by the seminiferous tubules, and they need to get out. And so the way that they're going to move is they're going to move from what are called the rete testis back here, and from here they will go through these little ductules into the epididymis. And the epididymis is this, you can see, quite coiled tube that's on the posterior side of each testicle. And so the epididymis technically begins the male reproductive tract, and it's going to pick up the sperm, as we said, from the efferent ductules, and it actually can store the sperm for a little while. It controls the fluid. It recycles damaged sperm. They're not supposed to get out, although you could probably think of some people who probably were formed from damaged sperm. It stores and protects them, and the sperm hangs out in here for about 2 weeks, and while it's in there, it's going to mature, because this is, about 23 feet long, so it's a pretty long coiled tube. Once they leave the epididymis, they're going to go through, you can call these tubes the ductus deferens or vas deferens, either one is fine. Again, long tubes, and they just start at the epididymis, and they're going to go all the way up through that spermatic cord into the groin, the inguinal canal. They're going to come up behind the bladder, and then they're going to end at this area called the ampulla. So here's my epididymis, so testicle, epididymis. Here's my ductus deferens or vas deferens, so that comes up through the cords into the groin, into the pelvic cavity, comes all the way around behind it's the urinary bladder, and then it ends at this thing called the ampulla. It's just like the wide area where it ends. So we will have this lined with smooth muscle, and it's smooth muscle that undergoes peristalsis to help move the sperm all the way through. And sperm can actually hang out in here for several months. So a vasectomy is done to basically a form of birth control for males. It's outpatient procedure, and what they typically do is they can go in and they can cut and seal the vas deferens, and this way the sperm are produced, but they can't get out. Now, they're still made, they'll just get broken down and reabsorbed by the body, so it's no big deal. And sometimes a male may have a vasectomy and then try to have it reversed, where they go back and basically reattach the tubes, and it can be successful when they do a reversal of that. As we go from the epididymis to the vas deferens, we come up here to the ampulla, and then what's going to happen is this thing called the ejaculatory duct. So I'll try to highlight it right here, and you can see the ampulla here. So what happens is, as the vas deferens come around, they join with the ejaculatory duct. Now that duct is going to be picking up semen. We'll talk about that in a moment. But then we go through the urethra, and there's three components of the urethra. So we have the ejaculatory duct, is this blue piece here. And then we go through the prostatic urethra, which goes through the prostate gland, the real short membranous urethra in the floor of the pelvic cavity, and then out, you can call it the spongy or the penile urethra. And so that's the pathway for the sperm. The penis is the male copulatory organ. So when we look at the penis, we have the root where it's attached, the body is the main part, and the glans is the tip. Now the glans may or may not have the foreskin on it. It's called the prepuce. The foreskin is just a piece of skin that covers it. Circumcision removes the foreskin. Here you can see the external urethral orifice as well. So that's the opening for both urine and sperm. And then when we have the skin, anytime you have a layer of skin with lipids, what can develop is something called smegma. It's one of the weirdest words in the English language, but smegma is described as this oily or cheesy-like substance that can be found under the skin of an uncircumcised penis. That's something I remember from my very first anatomy class. And you can get it if you have like someone who's obese and have folds of skin. They might develop, it can look kind of like white or cheesy. It forms between skin. And so, it can be smelly. So basically it's, circumcised or not circumcised, it's up to you. But, if you're uncircumcised, you just wash and bathe and clean all of that out. If we were to look inside the penis, this is kind of a silly photo, but you can see the purple area here and the red. We do have the urethra inside, but we have special erectile tissue. And so the tissue is under control of the parasympathetic division. When the parasympathetic division is activated, it releases nitric oxide, which is a vasodilator. So more blood flows to the penis, and you can see this tissue looks kind of sponge-like. And so we have what's called the corpora or corpus cavernosum, or you can call it cavernosa. These are the larger pieces of it here. And then we have the corpora spongiosum, which surrounds the spongy urethra. So if you call that the spongy urethra, it might help you realize that it's the corpora spongiosum that's closest to it, and the cavernosum is out here a little bit further away. And so as that tissue fills with blood, that's what gives it lift. That's what causes the erection. And we know that the blood to the penis is going to come from the internal iliac arteries. So the accessory glands there's three glands that make semen. The seminal vesicles are on the posterior side, up here of the posterior side of the urinary bladder, and they make up the bulk of semen. They make up about 60% of the semen. They make a pretty thick solution that's alkaline, and it does contain fructose. Fructose is a monosaccharide. Fructose supplies energy. Basically, the sperm use fructose to generate ATP so they can swim. The sperm are the only cells in the body that can actually use fructose. There's some other secretions, some other things inside these secretions from the seminal vesicles. There's prostaglandins. These are hormone-like chemicals. They're in the semen, and they do a few things. They help with the muscle contraction, the peristalsis, to help the sperm get out, and they help them swim. Fibrinogen, you heard about this back when we looked at blood. Well, it forms a temporary clot of the semen inside the vagina so that the semen can stay in there longer to increase the chances of fertilization. And as we mentioned, the vas deferens or ductus deferens, they come around behind the bladder, and you have that ampulla, and then they're going to join, you can see the seminal vesicles at the ejaculatory duct. So that's where the semen is going to enter, and the two are going to merge, and then they're going to pass through the prostate gland. The prostate gland, you see a little better here, is kind of a donut-shaped gland, and the urethra passes right through it, the prostatic urethra. And so this is going to pick up prostatic fluid. It's alkaline. It's more of a milky white fluid. It has something in it called citrate. We know that citrate is something that helps reduce the chances of UTIs and helps also with kidney stones, so that's in there. PSA is called prostate-specific antigen. This can be measured, by the way, in the blood. It's an indicator of prostate cancer. And then seminal plasm, which is basically an antibiotic enzyme. So another reason why males have fewer UTIs is they have this seminal plasm and they have citrate, which is in the semen. Now the last one is this little tiny one called bubble urethra or Cowper's glands. It's about the size of a pea, and this makes a pretty thick alkaline mucus, and this is what's going to be released first. So before the male ejaculates, this secretion is going to pass through the penis, through the spongy urethra, to neutralize any acidity, because remember, urine could have a pH of 4.5 to maybe 8, and sperm are not going to like it if it's very acidic. It will kill the sperm. So this goes through first through the penis, just to make sure, because again, you have the urinary bladder, just to make sure that if a male urinated and then had intercourse, that you wouldn't burn up the sperm on the way out. So here's our model of the male reproductive system, and I'm just going to go over a few things with you. We have the rectum here, and we have the anus, so we can see part of the digestive system. We also have, I'll write some, but I know it's going to get kind of messy. Right here, this pink thing we can see is a seminal vesicle. Now you don't have to tell me right or left when you do this one. We can see the urinary bladder here. Remember, on your practical, you have to say urinary bladder. This thing here is the prostate gland, so I'll color in blue. This is the prostatic urethra, and then we'll do purple over here. This is the ejaculatory duct. You can see the testis here, the epididymis. This is the scrotum. Now the vas deferens, you can see a piece of it here. You see it better on the other side of the model. Here's the bubble urethral gland, so you can see that. And then when we're looking on the model, again, you can see the spongy urethra. Let's draw that in light blue. You can call it penile or spongy. The little hole, remember, is the orifice for the urine to leave, the external urethral orifice. And then right here where you see the little squares, that's the corpus cavernosum, and then the area on either side of the spongy urethra is going to be the, let me get a different color here, is going to be the corpus spongiosum. So see, it's smaller, and then the squares show you the cavernosum. So you can see the structures here for the male reproductive system. Okay, so semen, typical ejaculation, about 2 to 5 mLs. It is critical. If a male doesn't produce enough semen, it could cause problems with fertility. Usually it's with the prostate gland or the seminal vesicles, because the seminal vesicles make about 60% of that semen. And then a lot of times you'll do a sperm count. So after 36 hours of abstinence, the male gives a sperm sample, and you would count the sperm, and there's about 20 to 100 million of sperm per ml of ejaculate. So having a very, very low sperm count could obviously affect fertility, but usually there's plenty of sperm in the sample. Now, we already mentioned the fructose. Remember, that's the nutrient that the sperm used to generate ATP. There's also chemicals to activate the sperm. This is called capacitation, and it basically is when they are able to swim. There's some enzymes. One such are proteases. Proteases break down protein because the vagina has mucus. There's cervical mucus the sperm have to get through. Mucus is a protein. And so these proteases are important for fertilization because they allow the sperm to get through the mucus. And then there's even additional prostaglandins, which again, the prostaglandins cause the peristalsis in the male reproductive system to move everything out, but it also causes reverse peristalsis of the uterus. And what that means is it allows the uterus to kind of pull the sperm up into the uterus to help with fertilization. And the pH of semen, notice, is around 7.2 to 7.8. And so when we look at sperm, we know that sperm do not do very well if the pH hits 6 or less. And so the semen is slightly alkaline to really help those sperms survive, because when the male ejaculates, it's typically going to be inside the female, inside the vagina, and the sperm need to get up into the uterus. And you'll see later that the pH of the vagina is lower than 6.0. So this wraps up our first lecture talking about the male reproductive system anatomy.